Now, the Green Party, last general election, they went from 1 MP to 4 MPs. Even more interestingly, some might argue, they came second behind Labour in 39 constituencies, which in theory means they've got a pretty solid springboard to win a load more MPs. And each year they've won more and more councillors. They just did at the last local elections. However, a lot of people would argue they haven't really cut through. That since the general election, the polling stagnated. Nigel Farage, I'm afraid to say, is offering cut-through messaging. He does have a sympathetic media on his side. That is an advantage. But nonetheless, the odds are what they are. And the Green Party is not offering a decent alternative to a disastrous Labour Party, which has really pissed off most of the country at this point. With that in mind, Zack Polanski, the current deputy leader of the Green Party of England Wales, is now standing to be leader. And he's, a lot of people are arguing, offering an answer to the sorts of problems, I suppose, that the Green Party currently faces. Is he the answer? Zack, we're going to find out. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks so much for having me on. How are you doing?
Very well. Very well. Feeling it maybe a bit more optimistic. We'll find out. We'll see. I just want to start. Like, why you? What are you going to offer that is different as an approach to the Green Party's existing approach, which a lot of people think hasn't really cut it, frankly?
Well, I think the moment is really clear. We've got a nature and climate crisis. We literally had racist riots on our streets last summer, and inequality is growing ever deeper. And this Labour government just don't have any answers. Nigel Farage and Reform are looking to sweep that up. And actually, we have a moment here where we can speak to the vast majority of people in this country who don't want people having to go to food banks, who don't want Israel being armed for a genocide, who don't want to see living standards constantly falling. And I think we need someone who can cut through and say that really, really clearly and unapologetic and challenge wealth and power in this country. I think I've got a track record of doing that. I think I've got a track record of working hard for the party, traveling around the country, and particularly a focus on local communities. I think sometimes our focus can become on Westminster, and Westminster is really important. The point of this is to win MPs, to win power and change the country. But in doing that, we really need a focus on grassroots, on communities. And I think with all the work that I've been doing and hope to continue doing, really making sure we're empowering those voices across England and Wales. So they're the people who are being centred, and that's how we take on wealth and power.
As I say, a lot of people do think the Green Party really have stagnated since the last general election, and that a lot of people, I mean, I'm going to be brutal about it, turned up at the last general election in the constituencies I spoke about, in, you know, the ones that the Greens didn't win, not even knowing most of them who the Green Party leaders are, not knowing who their local Green candidate was, but voting because they were already annoyed, angry with Labour, because of its terrible domestic policies, because of things like Israel's genocide in Gaza. And since they're just not having any cut-through messaging, sounding like policy wonks a lot of the time, you know, just not having a comm strategy. I know the media's hostile. We know all that, but we're not going to change that. That's not going to change. Would you accept that? The Green Party just hasn't had cut-through messaging. It just hasn't had a strategy to build on its success.
I think there's a fair kind of premise there. I would quibble on some of the, obviously Reform have a lot more money, they have a lot more kind of access to the media, they have their own TV channel, but I do think the premise of what you're saying is, you know, right, which is why I'm standing. I think also, you know, I think I'd love to see lots of people join the Green Party because they're annoyed with the Labour Party. I think that's a really legitimate reason. You're disillusioned and you're looking for something different. But what I really want to do in this campaign actually is how you started, which is offer hope. And actually say we can nationalise our public services. We can look at water companies that are pumping sewage into the water and charging us more for the privilege. We can talk about funding our public services. We can talk about taxing the wealthy. Like, there are whole policies here that can have some real solutions that will meaningfully change people's lives. And I think that's the real reason to join the Green Party right now, is we have the policies to transform the country. What we need to do is build up that power, build up from grassroots, have a mass movement. And that won't just be me, by the way. So this is not kind of a one-man leader gang. This is about going, we as a country can have a grassroots movement of all the organisations that care about these things, that don't want to see child poverty in this country, that want to challenge this failing Labour government and want to stop reform in its tracks. And that's what I believe the Green Party can be.
A lot of people would say that in the era that we live in, what you need to do is channel people's anger. And the question is, which direction do you channel it in? And Reform are channeling it against migrants, refugees, you know, the left, that kind of thing, rather than at the wealthy, powerful interests who run the country and have caused the mess that we're currently in. But two of the constituencies the Greens won at the last general election are former Tory seats, rural, and arguably they're going to push against any attempt to have a very strong left populist message because they're scared, like all MPs are, of losing their seats. But those two seats are not representative at all of the target seats that the Green Party need to win. Those 39 seats are largely quite urban, Labour-held constituencies. So is there a problem there? There's a conflict within the Green Party between those who actually have a vested interest in maybe just being worried about frightening the horses in those two constituencies, which are half the Greens parliamentary party, and that's going to really they're not going to be happy with this messaging, and they'll push against it.
So there's a few things here, some of which I agree with, some of which I disagree with. I think the first thing to say, I was on LBC yesterday, and just following me before was Andrea Jenkins, who was talking about putting asylum seekers into tents, including child asylum seekers. She didn't exactly say that. She was talking about the asylum seekers. Lewis Goodall said, does that include children? And she said, there's not that many children who are seeking asylum anyway, when there undoubtedly is. I think anyone who can hear an elected politician, an elected mayor, speaking about people who are vulnerable yet resilient and think that's okay, the only acceptable response is anger. It's not just anger. We have to have something to do about it, which is why that anger has to be mobilized into, we have to win power, we have to win the argument. But ultimately, no one should be complacent. No one should be calm about what reform are planning to do to this country. They are taking some of the most vulnerable people who already don't have any political support, and they are turning the powerful and the wealthy onto those, whether that's refugees, whether that's disabled people, whether that's trans people. Anyone at this point for the far right, in fact, not just the far right, it seems what used to be called the centre, is up for grabs. And everything the Green Party does must push back against that. There's no liberation unless we're all free, and ultimately we must stand with all our marginalised communities. In terms of the rural factor, inequality hurts you wherever you live, whether you live in the countryside or the city. And I think it's about finding what is that message that speaks to farmers. Now, I'm elected in London. I'm from Manchester. I'm not going to be disingenuous and pretend, wearing my wellies and trooping across a farm is like my natural habitat. But actually, a Guardian journalist spent a few hours with me last week and saw how door after door, people after we'd had the conversation said, you know what, I'm going to vote Green. And I wasn't lying to those people. I was having a conversation with them on their terms, which is ultimately recognizing that they are being screwed over by the same multimillionaires and billionaires who are screwing over people who are trying to rent, which is why we need rent controls. They're screwing over people who can't afford their bills, which is why we need to insulate their home. And they are also screwing over the farmers who are going to be vital in a climate crisis for food security and food resilience. So I think ultimately it's about finding the right people to speak to these people in a language that they understand. But the message might change in terms of how it's dressed, because you would talk to any human being in a different way, because that's just basic rapport. But you're not changing the basic policy, and you're not changing what you stand for. And I absolutely believe that the Green Party has a unique ability to be able to speak to people both in rural communities and urban communities with the same message that I'm talking about, which is ultimately the 99% uniting together, especially the working class. Not because we have some obsession with saying the phrase working class, but they are the mass majority of people. Like, the vast majority of people in this country are being screwed over by a system that is designed to screw them over, and by a media who largely are absolutely complicit, because they are being paid or donated to by the same people who are donating to the politicians who are screwing those people over. So it's all part of that same system. And I think it's about having a politics that exposes that and offers an alternative. And I believe that's what the Green Party can do. And I think the more people join the Green Party, and hopefully vote for me, that's the point of this exercise. But even in the meantime, people joining the Green Party, sending a clear message wherever they live, that actually they want an alternative to this Labour government, and wherever they are, everyone deserves to have a fair society where people are paid properly and treated with dignity.
One of the things Nigel Farage is good at is picking fights and then just riding the outrage, right? Not giving an inch. There's a big furore, doesn't care, and that helps set the political conversation on his terms. Trump's an example of that. You pick a fight, you cause a storm, and then everyone's talking on your terrain as a consequence. And I guess now, if we look at the kind of Green Party culture, it's been a bit. It seems a lot very conflict averse. About if we could just reason, if we could just win people over reason and make them see common sense or see the evidence. But that isn't how you win people over. Obviously, if just reasoning with people is how you change the world, then it wouldn't look like this. It's about understanding power dynamics and the conflict. So are you willing to pick fights, basically?
Absolutely, and we're going to have to pick fights, and they're going to be the right fights. So that's not just fighting for fighting's sake. I think that just exhausts everyone, and actually people want hope and they want purpose. But things like reform, we should never be on a platform with a reform spokesperson or MP without talking about the fact that 95% of their donations since 2019 were from fossil fuel companies and climate denying companies. That's £2.3 million. I put that to Reform's former head of comms the other day on the TV, and he just kept outright denying that it was true. Now, I won't lie, that's quite tricky to deal with, because we used to be in politics where people would generally have a conversation about things that were basic facts, and if they weren't, then you would expect someone to fact check them. That didn't happen, and we've got to adapt to that terrain. Now, part of that is just getting even better with the facts, so there's never even a moment of doubt about what we're talking about. And without flattering you too much, Owen, I think you're a particularly good example of this, where you just go in and you absolutely have the data and the evidence ready. And I think all of us, myself included, just have to step up on that. But I think what's happened in the past is we get obsessed with data and evidence, and then we forget to tell the story. So that's when it becomes very policy wonkish, very detailed, becomes dull, and we sound very earnest, or very even well evidenced, but just not interesting or not compelling. So there's that real sweet spot where you have the data and evidence, you're absolutely core in what you're saying, but also you're telling a powerful, compelling story that speaks to people that they understand. And of course, the obvious difficulty there is the right doesn't have to do that. They can just make up crap and tell a powerful story. And Nigel Farage does that really well. We can complain about it, and I can complain about it all day long, but that won't change things. What we just have to do is get better at telling stories.
Political linguists in the United States, George Lakoff, say the right speak in stories, the left often facts and statistics. And is that also that phrase about bringing a calculator to a knife fight, as it were? There's 4 million Muslim British citizens in this country who have traditionally been treated as voting fodder by the Labour Party, despite rampant Islamophobia within Labour ranks. You often hear, and we've heard in the by-election battle in Spain, Labour sources just briefing against Muslim voters, and that anger has really gone to a new level because lots of people are angry about Israel's genocide. That anger is particularly strong in Muslim communities, no question about that. And independent candidates have sprung up in a lot of those seats, and 4 of those, as many of those candidates, because it was Jeremy Corbyn as well, but I'm talking about the 4 who won in amongst predominantly, not all Muslim voters, but disproportionately Muslim voters. Liam Mohammed as well stood in Ilford North, nearly beat Wes Streeting. What's the strategy there going to be? Because the Green Party stood candidates there. And arguably, that split the vote in cases, and actually maybe it would just be better for them to stand aside. But equally, then you don't want independents standing against Greens where they have a better shot. Green Party culture, ultra democratic as it is, means if local parties want to stand their candidates, there's nothing really to stop them. But isn't that going to be a problem? Don't the Green Party just need to make a pact?
Well, I think the first place I'd start is with a very strong call to Liam Mohammed, Faiza Shaheen. You can add other people to that list. They are brilliant people. I've seen their politics. I've seen what they do in their communities, and I want them to join the Green Party. I can understand if previously the Green Party hasn't felt like quite the right home for them. I imagine they've matched with its values, they match with their policies. In fact, I know that largely from conversations I've had with them. And in fact, I'm appearing on a panel with Faiza this weekend. But I think partly, and I don't think this is unfair to them, we'd have to ask them, but some of it is about vibes in terms of, are we telling the story that amounts to the story that their community want to hear? I really want to tell those stories, and actually they can help me tell those stories. And so my biggest ask would be, I want to encourage those people to join the Green Party. I think there's a home where we got nearly 2 million votes. We do have an MP base, we have hundreds of councillors, and we have party organisation and party experience to go support them. And I think uniting people who have been running as independents and the Green Party is the most powerful thing the left can do right now. Now, I know that has to be a conversation. That has to be about building trust. I think we're already in that conversation. I think trust still needs to be built, but I'm really hoping over the period of this election campaign, we'll see more and more of that happening. Also, it was notable by its absence, but Zara Sultania, Nadia Whittome, Diane Abbott, Jeremy Corbyn, all very welcome. So I'm being clear, that is not my decision. It's the decision of elected members within the party. But as with everything I've got on my platform, I would really, really like to welcome them. And I would imagine that the vast majority of Green Party members would also be very excited to see those people as Green Party MPs. And the thing I would say to them, and I'll come back to your question, is what's the theory of change at this point? We know that the rules inside the Labour Party have been changed so that we will never see another Jeremy Corbyn or a left-wing candidate on the Labour ballot again. Clive Lewis couldn't even make that ballot in the last round of Labour MPs. And now we've got this whole swathes of corporate lobbyists and right-wing Labour MPs who will absolutely make sure that there is no way anyone who's remotely left-wing gets near any power within the Labour Party again. So I think there's really serious questions for Labour MPs to ask themselves, which I'm sure, these are intelligent people. I'm sure they're already having the conversations, they're already asking themselves. But I think sometimes the Green Party haven't been as strong, bold and clear as we can be in essentially rolling out the red carpet and saying, you align with our values, you'd be very welcome, and let's talk and let's make this work. More widely to your question, I think the party, we are a super democratic party. We will have those conversations. One of the reasons why I'd much rather people join us, because I think as soon as we get into the language of pacts and deals, there's kind of implicit agreement there that the Green Party is the home of white middle class educated people, and the independents are for working class and or global majority communities or other communities. And I don't think that's where the left should be. I think the left, and more generally when you look in history, white working class people have always stood with people of colour in their struggles. They've always stood with LGBT people. I think we are our best when we are united. And I want to make sure that the Green Party is a really clear, united home for all of those people. And if there are policies or things that people don't like, but they still match our values, and the values is the key point. But if it's about policies, we're a fully democratic party. We are one member, one vote. There are policies that I don't entirely agree with, and we'll carry on working within the party to get changed at conference. And the difference between us and the Labour Party is we have a genuinely democratic structure. You can get these things changed. You can have influence in the party. You can win those arguments. So I think fracturing is exactly the wrong way to go right now, but actually building a broad base and saying we can be in the same party together, even if we don't agree on absolutely everything, but our values are the same. That's the most powerful way to take this fight to the Labour government and to stop reform.
And with those, I'm interested the point you just made about Labour MPs, because you've got, for example, Zara Sultana, who's had the whip suspended. She voted to scrap the Tories' two-child benefit cap, which drives huge numbers of children to poverty in this country. And she had the whip suspended. There were 7 suspended, but most of them were readmitted. She wasn't one of them. I don't think she'll ever be let back in the Labour Party, I have to say. There's also the likes of Clive Lewis in Norwich South, which is a very green seat. The Greens do well there. And he's probably the most green-like Labour MP, to be honest. I mean, are conversations happening? Have they been happening? And is there going to be a strategy to try and get them to defect?
I think Zara Sultana's pretty much gone to war with the Labour Party at this point. I think she knows that she's not going back. In fact, there was that shot the other day of a woman shouting at a Labour MP saying, I'm not going to ever vote for Keir Starmer. If Zara Sultana was leader, I'd vote for her, but I'm voting Green. And I think she really spoke for a nation. And to add to it, to see Zara retweet it, and I think she said, good afternoon to this woman and this woman only, which is another reason I love Zara and the Green Party, for her humour. Fundamentally. I also think, when you look at Clive, I'm really careful when I talk about these people, because they're people who have their own thoughts, they have their own ideas, and I want to make it really clear I'm not speaking for them, and I'd love to have these conversations with them. But I think it's wild if Clive doesn't join the Green Party. The Green Party are very close to him in his seat. It's pretty marginal, and actually there is a good chance, and this isn't a threat, I don't know what the plans are in Norwich South, but a good strong Green candidate in Norwich South could unseat Clive Lewis. Clive Lewis is a brilliant MP. I want to see Clive Lewis return to Parliament on things like proportional representation, on climate action, on challenging child poverty, on just generally being a voice that has challenged Keir Starmer and been clear about it. He's been really good a lot of the time. In fact, he was the first MP, I think, to stand up in the Climate and Nature Bill, co-sponsored by Carla Denyer, who was really clear about this. So I'd love to see Clive join the Green Party. In terms of conversations, obviously, this is the most political answer I'll give you in this interview. I can't talk about private conversations I'm having, but also I don't think these conversations should necessarily be private, which is why I'm being so open about this. I've got 2 vested interests here. I've got the people and I've got the planet. I want to see a better country. I want to see the Labour government out. We know that the Labour government are going to lose lots of seats. We know that. That's very clear at this point, or it's clear at this point if there was an election tomorrow. The question is, are they going to lose seats to the Green Party, or are they going to lose them to Reform? By principled, influential people who were previously in the Labour Party joining the Green Party, they will be doing one of the most fundamental things they could do to make sure that we don't see Nigel Farage as a Prime Minister, and to make sure we don't see more Reform MPs. When I talk about eco-populism or eco-socialism, whatever phrase you want to use, I think the wording almost doesn't matter. It's about the principle of redistributing wealth and challenging wealth and power. To have Clive Lewis and Zara Sultana on the Green Party team, I think would be a game changer, and I think it would also be great for them too.
A few of the final things. I mean, the social media strategy of the Green Party, I have to say, I think it's been piss poor. Just to say it, it's not good. And it's very clear, if you look at TikTok, that Reform and Nigel Farage are doing very well. Because we can talk about the media being rigged against the left, and that's absolutely true. And Nigel Farage obviously getting, right-wing newspapers sucking up to it, and the BBC for that matter. But obviously, on social media, you can reach people. So I just look at the social media game of the, and it's not good. It's bad. It's weak. And, and you can see, I've been to other countries where the far right have done well, like Austria. And again, the far right in Germany, AfD, Freedom Party in Austria, really good on social media. I just kind of think, can't you just crowdfund for a really good social media professional to just make really good viral content that reaches people? Because again, in Germany, Die Linke recently, they were nearly wiped out before, but then social media helped them to increase their support. It just seems like a really basic, easy win, which would only cost, like, if you crowdfunded for that, help us turn our comms around so we can take a Reform in the Labour Party, you'd get a lot of people who would just chip in for that. Can't you just do something basic like that?
Amazing. So I think three things there. The first will dissatisfy you, and the other two answers I think you'll like. The first thing is I can't crowdfund now because I'm a candidate in the election. So just for
I mean when you win. When you win, yeah. I mean, if
Absolutely.
You win, of course. Sorry.
Indeed, there's no complacency. Please, everyone, make sure you vote. And if you're not a member of the Green Party, then join the Green Party to vote. Compulsory to say that. I think so. Social media, yes. We do know that the far right often own social media platforms, and so they will incentivize some of the hateful and divisive stuff. But again, that cannot be an excuse. We've got to change that. I had a really amazing meeting with Gary Stevenson. One thing he said to me that kind of really resonated with me was, he said, it feels like a lot of the time the party is trying to push its social media. What you need to do is push individuals, because actually people much prefer the individuals they support rather than a kind of party branding. I've been trying to take that advice myself, and I think I've certainly stepped up my social media in the last few months, trying to tell kind of powerful stories. But actually, I think, again, this isn't about just the leadership. What I want to see is all the candidates across the country, particularly those in their communities, people like Mothan Ali, who again has really stepped up his social media in Gipton and Hare Hills, telling the stories of their community, because I think those are the stories that aren't told in the media anyway. We're always hearing stories that are in the Westminster bubble, or stories that, what was on the Today programme that day. What we're not hearing are those stories of like genuine community action that's happening, and things that are happening up in the north or in Wales. There's huge elections next year in Wales. We look like we're going to break through to the Senate for the first time. I'd love to see more of our Welsh Green Party members and candidates really telling those stories on social media. But what I do accept is people need support to do that. They need investment. Shout out to the Green Party social media team at this point, because I hear they get a lot of flack. I understand that our social media isn't good enough, but I also just want to say their staff team are working flat out. What they don't have, I say team, it's one person. What they don't have is more resource. So your point is well made. We need to be making sure that we are raising that resource to work with the social media team. There's also more wonky answer, but it's important. The Green Party executive, because we're not just electing a leader or deputy leaders, we're also electing an entire executive that decide the budget. Very often on the budget, we prioritise certain things, but we haven't prioritised in the past social media. I think the landscape has clearly changed, and there's no way that you can be a political party that wants to gain in the ways that we do and create a grassroots movement without being more present on social media. So I guess my long answer, but the short answer is hear you loud and clear and working on it.
And just a couple of final things. The Labour on domestic policy, what are the key big issues that you want to take on with the Labour government, which has been in power now for nearly a year? In the polling is obviously doing very badly. Keir Starmer himself is slightly less popular than the bubonic plague at this point. What on domestic policy would be your priorities as in terms of taking on Labour and pushing an alternative?
I think the first thing to go for is that 2-child benefit cap. Every expert that you can find says that this is pushing children further into poverty. We know one of the biggest issues with you being in poverty later on in life, or in fact having interaction with the criminal justice system, is living in poverty. Of course, anyone living in poverty is unacceptable in and of itself. So just the fact that Labour government is doing this is unthinkable. I think we really need to push them hard on this. I'd link in that with two as well, the winter fuel payments and also the disability cut. So putting that kind of into a block of like disastrous own goals that the Labour Party are making just to be performatively cruel, I would say is the first thing. Then the second thing is protecting the National Health Service. Wes Streeting clearly has pretty awful plans for it. I felt during the election he was hiding those discreetly. He's becoming more and more brazen about that, plus the money that he's taken from private healthcare companies. This one, I think the question is always, how are you going to pay for it? I think there's lots of questions around how you're going to pay for things, but one of the things is to redistribute wealth from the very wealthy. So a wealth tax of 1% and multimillionaires and billionaires could be raising tens of £billions and could be putting straight back into our NHS. Of course, that is not the only way to raise money, but that is one way of doing it. And then I think the third thing is around housing. So we have a housing crisis. We need to be building more houses. Now, that doesn't sound different to what the Labour Party say. And in fact, the Labour Party would say, we want to build more houses. The Green Party are NIMBYs. I think we need to, this is an example of having a fight. We need to take this on head on. I cannot be clearer that we need more houses in this country. But what houses do we need? We need council houses. We need social housing. We need homes that people can actually afford. When the Labour Party talk about housing, they're talking about taking money from private developers in donations and then building huge empty blocks that no one lives in, that aren't affordable, that just stand there rotting essentially. And there are also assets that are hoarding, which is causing even more problems for the economy because that is hoarding wealth. I think we really need to take that fight head on because yes, we do need houses, but they need to be the right homes in the right place.
And you mentioned before Israel's genocide in Gaza. What's the Green Party's key message there?
I mean, the first thing is we need to stop the genocide. I've got other messages too, but I think as soon as you get more nuanced, you can lose the kind of broad mass of people that you have. But let's start there with stop the genocide. I think that can't be said enough. And how specifically do you do that? You stop selling arms to Israel and you put pressure on allies. Of course, whether Donald Trump at this point is an ally is a whole nother conversation, but you certainly use any leverage you have to stop them doing that. And on with Donald Trump, to waive a state visit at him is completely unacceptable. It was unacceptable before, but since then he's been talking about building luxury condos in Gaza. Donald Trump should be nowhere near the UK at this point, and we certainly should not be welcoming him and rolling out the red carpet. So I think that's very clear. I think more widely on Israel, though, we need to be stopping the occupation, and we need to be talking about that. Louis Theroux's documentary recently about the settlers, this is not a new issue, but I think it drew light to just how extreme and how bad Netanyahu's government is. And I think we need to be talking about that, but not just talking about it, applying pressure on the Israeli government too. Of course, applying pressure on Israel is only going to take us so far. They're not listening to Keir Starmer, not that he's going to do this anyway. But I think it's about showing the global leadership to the rest of Europe and to the rest of the country that if we're going to have any moral integrity, any moral clarity or consistency at all, then we absolutely need to be calling out Israel in the same way that we call out Putin, and we should be doing. But there's a complete inconsistency in the way that we have welcomed Ukrainian refugees, for instance, again, which we absolutely should be doing, but aren't welcoming refugees from Yemen, from Syria, from Afghanistan, all conflicts that we have played parts in causing.
Finally, in The Guardian, this was a piece about the Labour Party and its disastrous state, and it's obviously got a drubbing in the local elections as well as the Tories. A saving grace, some ministers believe, is that they are about the Greens is that they're underperforming. I think we're extraordinarily fortunate that the Green Party are shit, one minister said. If they had any kind of charismatic or populist leadership, would be 8 or 10 points further down the polls. I would still believe we could squeeze the vote if it came to it, but we should be aware that they may be voters who simply will not turn out for us. Yeah, I guess there's just two basic points there. Just to kind of a good finishing pitch for you in terms of, are you going to prove this minister wrong? How are you going to prove that minister wrong? Because the Labour Party at the moment do not, they see the Greens as like an irritation at the moment, like, but not as the key menace. That at the moment they're just pitching everything towards reform and raiding their policies and their rhetoric. And the other is, the point they make there is they're confident about a squeeze message. which is at the next election, particularly if Nigel Farage has clearly displaced the Conservative Party, that they will panic people into thinking it's us or it's Nigel Farage. Don't risk it with the Greens. If you vote for the Greens, you'll end up with Nigel Farage. That is nailed on what they're going to do, 100%, even as they take on all his rhetoric and his policies. So yeah, how are you going to prove that Mr. Wrong? And how are you going to fight that squeeze message? Because that squeeze message is coming down the tracks towards us.
We need to make sure that this Labour government is more scared of losing votes and ultimately seats to the Green Party than to reform. And the way we do that is, it's ironic for a Labour minister to call the Green Party shit after their performance right now, but ultimately we need to expose that performance right now. And this is why being bold in our communications is so important, because the Labour Party think they might be able to get away with, when it comes to election time, talking about the subtle things that they have changed or the slight incremental differences they've made. In fact, I had this with a Labour minister the other day when I talked about a wealth tax. She said, we put up corporation tax. They put it up slightly. It is nowhere near in line with income tax, which means we are taxing right now income more than wealth, completely the wrong way around. So what we need to be doing is speaking really clearly about what this Labour government are doing and pointing out about how what it is doing is enabling Farage. They are in no way challenging Farage. In fact, they are encouraging them. Because right now, if someone wanted Farage's policies, they would just vote for reform. They would not vote for the Labour Party. So the only way that we are really going to beat this squeeze message is by a national popular grassroots movement. This is by communities knowing, because we're in their community spaces, their estates, their workplaces, wherever it might be, where they know Green Party people. It is not us and them, it is us. They know that ultimately the Labour Party are the ones that have let them down, along with the Tories, and reform of the charlatans and the grifters who are backed by billionaires, and their MPs are literally millionaires. And who the Green Party are the people who are in the community, who will stand with you, who will work all year long for you, and will make a difference to this country. I believe we can do that, but we need to do it unapologetically, we need to do it clearly, and we need to do it with everything we've got.
What's the cut-off date for people to join the Green Party if they wanted to vote for you?
The last day of July, so July 31st, you can join. But I would say join even sooner, because actually the voting period is not till August. The leadership contest is not declared till September. That is months and months that this Labour government can continue to spiral and not be challenged in the way that they should. That's months and months that reform can continue to ratchet up the rhetoric on all marginalised groups. And actually, right now is the time to get involved with the Green Party. Yes, of course, I want people to vote for me. But actually, even more important than that, I want us to be building in communities. I want us to be organising, and I want us to be taking that fight to Labour. And it's right now, not in 5 years' time, not in 3 months' time, but right now.
Brilliant stuff there from Zack Polanski, who's standing to be leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. Do leave your comments. I want to hear your thoughts. Press like, subscribe, obviously, but share the video as well. Make sure everyone hears what Zack has had to say. But Zack, it's been great to speak to you, and I will be very much following the contest with huge amounts of interest and writing and doing videos about it. So fingers crossed.
Thanks so much for the platform. Always appreciate it.